Good afternoon. My name is Simone Mercer, and I have the person centered approach. So, Carl Rogers was born in 1902. He was born to a fundamentalist Christian home. He was he was raised right outside. It was a small suburb. It was called Oak Park, right outside of Illinois. Um, he went on to go to the University of Wisconsin, as well as Union Theological Seminary College, and then later he went to obtain his psychology degree from Columbia University. And from then on, he was offered several clinical and academic positions like in the field. And actually he later became the president of the American Psychological Association. So he's doing some pretty big things. But as a brief overview of his approach, his approach is more so like a humanistic approach, and it kind of like deals in the ways in which individuals like perceive themselves, and usually unconsciously, like basically how a counselor can interpret like their unconscious thoughts or ideas. That was the approach that he kind of used, and the client really the client was more so in control. It was no direction from the actual counselor, the therapist, how it usually was. Because most approaches back then or coming up, a lot of them were directive approaches, like very directive approaches where the counselor was more so in control than the client. And this one was being that the client was kind of more so in control than the counselor. And he didn't want the counselor to be perceived as the expert or more than the client. When in actuality, I mean, granted you do, but that's not the relationship he wanted to establish and the environment he wanted to set for the counseling relationship. So he kind of actually was a quiet revolutionary. He introduced revolutionary ideas in the 1940s, and like I said, there were stark contrasts from the psychoanalytic and directive approaches that were out at the time. And he kind of just shifted the focus more so of the therapy session, the focus more so on just the emphasis of like the technique and the relationship that the counselor and the client had more so. It kind of moves away from the idea of like the therapist being, of course, the expert, and just pushes more towards the fact that helping the client find what's wrong within them on their own. It's not a guided process. So basically the counselor helps the client recognize like their own capacity of like self-healing, self-regulation, and just all around personal growth and development, honestly. Some of the like the core purpose of the whole approach is to facilitate the clients their actualizing tendency, like their actual growth of like their self-regulation and their personal growth. But the counselor basically just aids the process in providing just support and just being empathetic in a sense. Some of the factors that can actually affect the client's ability to flourish, like to actually have a positive impact on the actual whole therapeutic session, like low self-esteem, which can you don't have to basically have something happen. It could just be maybe a way that you were maybe brought up or whatever the case was. But low self-esteem, lack of self-reliance, just and very little openness to new experiences and to different things. The approach kind of recognizes that sometimes your social environment can impact how you feel about yourself and what goes on in your life, and like the personal relationships that you actually get into and develop and acquire can definitely greatly impact these factors as well, like your self-esteem or your self-reliance or your lack thereof, or even being, as the smallest thing is being open to new experiences. Your personal relationships and your environment can definitely affect that in a good way. The therapy, it kind of offers like it's a neutral, comfortable setting, somewhere, a safe place. It gives the client somewhere safe that they can open up and not be guided, not be like poked and prodded. It's more so like you kind of lead it, like what's on your mind kind of thing. And that sounds like corny, but that's really what this approach was about. It was definitely client centered, and they switched the term person centered to go so more in the client centered direction, because it's honestly, he realized that therapeutic relationship was more important than actually questioning the client about everything. So once you provide that safe place and everything, and you are empathetic, and you're just accepting and non-directive, and you're not judgmental, then the client, I feel like, feels safe, and it's more so person-centered and client-centered than it is more so of the counselor. But the client should be at ease, being authentic and being very open, and just letting it flow organically. That always helps. And then it helps them learn about themselves, honestly. When they're that open and willing to be that open and organic and genuine about the session, it allows them to be open and learn more about who they are. It offers individuals the opportunities to like counter the past experience. So it just offers them opportunity to basically just talk about those past experiences if you want to, and how that affected your conditions of worth and how that made you feel. Possible changes seen from this therapy. Possible changes seen if the therapy session is actually successful. You have a closer agreement between an individual and their like idealized and actual selves. So that gap that you would have is not as large. It becomes smaller because they start to align what self they idealize, and then their actual self. It starts to become more congruent. And that's another thing. You want to have congruence. Yourself being congruent, because you need to be congruent with your feelings and your emotions and everything before you actually start counseling someone else. But it also allows them a chance to also be congruent with their feelings, maybe that they're suppressing or they're pushing off, or then the actual day-to-day of what's really going on. So it allows them to kind of bridge that gap and align it up. You have a way better self-understanding and awareness of yourself. So it teaches more about the client and like who they are. You have lower defensiveness. So a lot of people that are pretending to be somebody that they're not, or they have this but they're really this, they're kind of like on defense when somebody sees that gap, or sees that, wait, you're this but then you're really this. So they usually have that defense. But if it was a good session, then that defense would be lowered. You would have less defensiveness. You would feel more attacked, and your insecurities and guilt wouldn't be, of course everybody has them, but they wouldn't be as severe, and it wouldn't affect you as much. They would kind of like making that gap kind of smaller. And then you have a greater ability to trust yourself. And then when you have a great ability to trust yourself, you can start working on trusting others. Healthy relationships are cultivated when there is a positive client-centered therapy session. It teaches you how to cultivate positive relationships, healthy relationships that are actually good for you and not to your detriment. Improvement in self-expression. So you learn how to express yourself, and it's a healthier manner, honestly. And in a healthy and positive manner, actually. And then overall, it's a healthy sense of change. Like, you feel like you're growing completely. You're growing more in a positive way. Your development and your growth is positive instead of negative. You're actually getting somewhere. You're here, now you're getting there. So like, you're just bridging that here from here. And you're getting to an even playing field, congruent with your life. And then you have more knowledge on, of course, the theory and how it works. And you have, like, I don't know, it's like almost like a trust that you kind of build with your client and yourself. You feel like once they start seeing like the positive outlook and like all the positive things that are happening in their life and how their lives are changing for the better, that's kind of like the counselor's like reward, because it shows like, okay, cool, like they're not waking up, but they're coming to a realization that it's about them, and a lot your environment and your decisions that you make and your life processes that affects you, and it can affect you in a positive manner or in a negative manner. And if it is affecting in a negative manner, the first step is acknowledging that there is an issue and that you're willing to change and you're willing to fix it. So change is kind of like the cornerstone to it all. But like I said, going back, it was a client versus patient. They were battling hard from client person to patient, and they realized client was the best one. It kind of like they have like complete autonomy. They felt like a client had a complete autonomy over all of their decisions, or their decisions in general that they made. And they just they believed in equality. He believed in equality between the client and the therapist, because he wanted to be an even playing field, so nobody would feel inferior or superior, whatever. It would be comfortable. It would be somebody, okay, you can definitely talk to them, and it's not going to feel like, oh yeah, they already know the answers to everything, so I'm just messed up kind of thing. It was more so, okay, what do you have kind of thing? What do you have to offer? And then I'm listening, I'm empathizing with you, I'm active listening, and you're kind of just making them feel safe in a sense. Just making them feel safe to a certain extent. So some of the core conditions that were actually expressed in the approach were congruence, like I stated earlier. Empathy, I also stated that one earlier. And then just unconditional positive regard. So basically, with congruence, like I said, the counselor is completely genuine. There's no in between. They're actually trying to align themselves with you. So it feels as if we're even, like we're on the same playing field. Like you're empathizing with them, almost not like saying you've been through what they've been through, but just make them feel comfortable and safe and like actually talking about it. Unconditional positive regard is like a counselor is basically being non-judgmental, and like you actually value your client and what they say, and what they say is important. And even if it's not, that's not your area to even say it is or it isn't. You're just there to actually listen, not be directive, and just make sure they walk away with a better understanding of themselves, and making them more aware of just positive decisions, positive affirmations, stuff like that. Making it a positive environment for them so they can grow and they can lift themselves back up to where they should be or where they desire to be. Empathy, basically you're striving to just understand the client's experience. I mean, of course, you're not going to completely understand what everybody has been through or be able to relate to every single client. But if you do, you can definitely throw that in there to a certain extent. Don't do too much self-disclosure, but to a certain extent, self-disclosure is good to understand, to let the client understand and know that, okay, I'm not the only one kind of thing. And some people actually do feel like that when they're going through counseling, that they feel like they're the only one. But no, with client-centered, you can kind of align yourself just very slightly, with some of the issues maybe the client is having, and it makes them feel safer, like they're not going through it by themselves. But yes, that's what I have on person-centered approach, client-centered approach, whatever you want to call it. And I thank you so much for watching my video.